This man holds 65 patents. Gene's inventions include the LCD projector. Here he is being introduced by the great Isaac Asimov. You're going to be amazed at what he's now up to, using holography to teleport energy to nanoparticles in order to cure disease. Please welcome Gene Dolgoff.
I have been studying waves my whole life. I've discovered that understanding waves is the secret to understanding the universe and everything in it. The thing that got me really interested in waves was a field called holography. It is a way to record and play back waves. A hologram is not a photograph. A photograph has an image recorded on it. A hologram has no image recorded on it. Instead, it has a special pattern recorded on it, and that pattern can take waves and redirect them in space to create any kind of image you want. So let me show you a comparison between a photograph and a hologram. Here you have a photograph, and you can move it around, but you can't see behind people. But if it's a hologram, you can. Very big difference. This is what a real hologram looks like. And as you move it around, you see a full color image, even though this is a single sheet of black and white film, from all angles, three-dimensionality, high resolution, and you can look at it and say, wait a minute, this is just a flat piece of film. How come it's producing this three-dimensional image? But it's because the light waves from the room are being redirected from the hologram to create the same light waves that were there originally. And so you see those waves and you see the same thing. Now, holograms, as exciting as they were, couldn't be mass produced. They couldn't be replicated. They were very expensive. So I set to work on it, and I invented what's called hologram transfer printing, which is used on credit cards and debit cards and other things. And so now holograms became inexpensively mass producible. I even came up with the idea that matter, which is made of waves, could be recorded in a hologram, which means that we could make what I call a matter hologram, and you could use that hologram to reproduce the matter. And that meant you could have a player in your house that would create trees and animals, and it would be real. And this idea led me to meet Gene Roddenberry. And I explained this to him, and I said, if you're going to be realistic, the future is going to contain holograms and matter holograms, and you'll have to include this in your show. And he said, okay, and he named it the holodeck. So that's how that came about. Now, I got involved in medical applications of holography, and here's an example. I made holograms of X-rays, of CT CAT scans, of ultrasound, and eventually MRI, which is what this is. Most of us are going to have, or already have had, experience with somebody who had heart attack, stroke, Alzheimer's, cancer, any of these big diseases. And the way they treat it is not really very successful, and I'll tell you why. Now here's a person who is being treated for a cancerous tumor. What they're doing is they're sending an X-ray beam into the person to kill the tumor. But the problem with this is that you see beams going through the person to get at that little cancer. But meanwhile, all the healthy cells around it are getting blasted as well. Here you see a beam coming in. Sure, it gets to the tumor, but it goes through skin, bone, muscles, nerves, and it does damage on the way in and on the way out. So that's a real problem. What they're trying to do here is use energy to heat up a tumor or a plaque in an artery or a plaque in the brain from Alzheimer's, and the radiation is being turned into heat by the absorption of the cells. Well, that's not very efficient, and the thing you're trying to irradiate generates heat, but so does the healthy tissue. So I said, what if we could turn up the heat only on the cells we want to destroy? And I thought of the idea of using metal and radio waves. Because if you send radio waves to metal, it heats up more than human tissue heats up from radio waves. In fact, we're having radio waves go through us all the time. People talk on the cell phone, it's going right through you. Well, so I came up with this idea of making these nanoparticles. Nano is meaning a billionth, and these would be a few billionths of a meter in diameter. And I came up with a way to send these nanoparticles to the cells that we want to get rid of. I use something called monoclonal antibodies, which are antibodies that seek out particular kinds of cells. So if I want to go and get these on the plaques in your arteries, I can make a certain kind of monoclonal antibody, and it'll go through your system, find the plaques, and it'll deposit there. That's seek. And now we want to destroy. Now we send the radio waves in. The radio waves will heat up the metal and vaporize the plaque. So here's what I proposed. This is a tumor cell, and these little particles consist of the monoclonal antibody, and it consists of the metal particle, and it consists of something that can be detected from the outside, like from an MRI or a CAT scan, so that we know where to send the energy. I wound up meeting Alan Alfieri at Albert Einstein College of Medicine and Montefiore Hospital and Sloan Kettering. And we eventually put together a team, which is a brilliant team, right now 17 people, surgeons, oncologists, radiologists, physicists, and engineers. Here's some of the results of some of the work. This was a mouse, and this was done with many mice. And you see the tumor there. That nanoparticles were put in the tumor. The radio waves were sent to the nanoparticles, and in 2 weeks, the tumor was just about gone. And in a month, it was completely gone. The tumors never came back. Then we tried it in dogs. Now here you see a tumor in the mouth of a dog. And by the way, these are dogs. We didn't give them cancer. They had cancer. And the vet gave up on them and said, I don't know what to do. Anyway, the nanoparticles were put in, and in 2 weeks, the tumor was gone. And that never recurred again. So the dog was cancer-free. So that was very exciting. And what we hope to be able to do is to use it on plaques. So for instance, in your artery, normally you have good blood flow, but for all of us, these plaques start to build up, and they start to restrict blood flow. And that's a real problem. What we want to do is target the plaques so that you can have them removed without surgery, without medication. So then you'll never have heart attacks or strokes. Here's what happens if there's a blockage in the heart. You have a heart attack. Or in the brain, you have a stroke. There's also another kind of plaque that we're targeting. These are amyloid beta plaques in the brain, and this is what causes Alzheimer's disease. So we want to target all of these. So there's a whole host of diseases that could be treated with this technique. But there's a problem. And the problem is, even though these worked, these were on the outsides of the bodies of the animals. What happens when we want to go inside the body? Then we're sending the radio waves with high intensity into the tissues, and the tissues do respond to radio waves, and they do heat up, and it starts to create collateral damage. So it's still a problem. So I said, okay, I'm going to solve this problem. What I need is a technique that will take the energy from our machine and make it disappear, and it'll go teleport in to the artery and then reappear, rematerialize. We need teleportation. How can you make teleportation real? Well, I had to find something in nature that would show me that it was possible. Because, you know, we always look to nature to guide us to solving problems. The only reason we have airplanes that fly is because we analyze how birds do it. So I said, okay, I've got to find somewhere in nature where teleportation exists, and I'll just copy it. Wasn't so easy to find that. However, I found it. Believe it or not, teleportation does exist in nature. It happens in the atom. In the atom, you've got a nucleus, and then you've got electrons circling the nucleus. And what's amazing is, if energy, like a photon, hits an electron, it absorbs that energy, and it jumps up to a higher orbit. But the amazing part is, it doesn't travel through this space. It just disappears here and reappears here. It's what's called quantum tunneling. And here's a diagram of it happening. You see the electron going around, it gives off the photon, it goes down to the lower level, then gets a photon, goes up to the higher level, but it's never in between. How does this happen? You know, this is an electron. An electron is a piece of matter. It's the smallest piece of matter, but it's a piece of matter. How does it disappear and then reappear? How is this possible? Well, this guy figured it out. His name is Louis de Broglie. And he got the Nobel Prize in 1924 for figuring this out. Here's a wave, and a cork is bouncing up and down on the wave. And you see the wave's going this way, but the action is perpendicular to it. And that's the amount of movement of the cork is dependent on how much energy is in that wave. So that's a single wave, and it does something. Now, if you have two waves that meet, where they overlap, there's this interaction that takes place. And it's very strange, and this is called wave interference. And there are two kinds of wave interference. One, which you're pretty familiar with, you can see here, we're banging two balloons on a pond, creating two sets of waves, and those two waves overlap. And when they overlap, they're creating these rows of very high waves. That's constructive interference. These waves are in phase, and they add to each other. So take a look at the cork again. Here we have two waves, they meet in phase, and the cork is now moving up and down twice as far because they add to each other. You'd expect that, that's normal. But then there's another kind of interference. If you notice, in between the areas of high waves and constructive interference, there are these dead spots where the water is flat. And this really happens. This is called destructive interference. The waves are out of phase, so that when one wave is going up, the other wave is going down, they cancel. If a cork is sitting on water that's undergoing destructive interference, it sees no energy. It just sits there. As far as it's concerned, there's no energy here. Of course there is, but the two waves are overlapping and canceling. This is destructive interference, and this is the motherlode. Destructive interference is amazing. It's incredible. You got to think about this a second. What this means is if we take two bright light beams, shine them together on a screen, of course the spot's going to be twice as bright, right? Well, if the two waves are out of phase, they won't. Those two bright beams will hit the screen and it'll be black. Now, can you imagine this? Think about it. Two super bright beams. In fact, two beams from a laser that could be so strong could burn a hole in steel. But you overlap them, put them out of phase, and they make nothing happen. You can put your hand there, you feel nothing. You see nothing. This is destructive interference with light. Well, this really happens, and I know you don't believe me. So I thought I'd prove it to you. And I put this little setup together. So on this setup, we have a piece of glass which acts as a beam splitter, and we have two mirrors, one here and one here, and then we have a screen over there. So what happens is, the light comes through, goes through the beam splitter, hits the mirror, goes back to the beam splitter, goes to the screen. But another beam bounces off the beam splitter, hits this mirror, and goes through the beam splitter and goes to the screen. So altogether, we have two different beams overlapping at the screen. So now, here you see the spot on the screen. That's what you would expect. But now, if I turn the knob that adjusts one of the mirrors so that they go out of phase, watch what happens. It disappears. Destructive interference eliminates the spot, and yet the two beams are there. And I'll prove it to you. I'm now going to put my hand in front of one of the mirrors and watch the screen. The beam shows up. Now I'm going to put my hand in front of the other mirror, and the beam shows up. But with my hand out, you see no beam, because the two beams are overlapping out of phase. This is destructive interference. It really happens. So now, back to Mr. Bad Haircut. He understood this. He understood that there was destructive interference of waves. So, these areas that are dark are separated by the areas that are high water. And this is what happens with two sources in nature. So I said, okay, how can I design a system that will use this principle, but instead of making this pattern of dark and light, dark and light, we'll make one spot really bright and everything all the way around it, no energy. That way, if the body is what's all the way around and the plaque is right in the middle, the energy will teleport into the plaque. So I created a process called holographic energy teleportation, HET. And the way I designed it was by making a ring and making that ring an electronic hologram. So that hologram can send waves that, because of the structure and because of how we control it, will create interference patterns, and there will be constructive interference at one point surrounded by destructive interference. Now, what if we put a patient in there? Well, here's the plaque that we want to get rid of. All the signals come in. There's destructive interference everywhere. The body sees no energy except right here, where the plaque is, and we can disintegrate it. So I said, what a great idea this is. But is it real? Could it work? So we input it into the computer to make a simulation, and this is what came out. The energy in one point was 10,000 times the energy of a single beam coming from one emitter, and the rest was zero. So we were able to create constructive interference in one spot with destructive interference everywhere else. Very exciting, but will it work in the real world? So we made an experiment. We took a big tank of water and we put solenoids all the way around it. Now, a solenoid is just an electromagnetic coil. When you put a current on it, it takes a metal bar and moves it down. So in this case, it would move down and hit the water and make waves. So by sending the signal to all these solenoids at the right times, we can create waves exactly when we want that will overlap and create destructive interference everywhere except where we want it. And what we decided to do is show the letter S. So here you see the waves are interfering and creating raised water, showing the letter S on the surface of the water. The rest is flat, as you can see by the reflection of the window. So it actually works in the physical world. So we created this company, Holobeam Technology, and we are expecting to be able to perfect this process and get this FDA approved within 5 years. So at that time, we can all wave bye-bye to these diseases. Thank you.